Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, February 10th. U.S. President Donald Trump says 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports will be announced today.
Just so I understand,
we'll also be announcing steel tariffs on Monday.
On this tomorrow?
Monday, yeah, tomorrow.
What countries will those go on?
Everybody. Steel.
Including Canada and Mexico?
Yeah. Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum too.
His announcement came after Fox News aired a partial interview with Trump earlier Sunday, during which he said he wants to see Canada become a U.S. state.
You know, the Prime Minister said this weekend to a group of Canadian businessmen, he was at a private meeting, he said that your wish for Canada to be the 51st state is a, quote, real thing. Is it a real thing?
Yeah, it is. I think Canada would be much better off being a 51st state because we lose $200 billion a year with Canada, and I'm not going to let that happen. It's too much. Why are we paying $200 billion a year essentially in subsidy to Canada? Now, if they're a 51st state, I don't mind doing it.
And while it's unclear where the $200 billion figure comes from, Statistics Canada says Canada's overall trade surplus with the U.S. was $94.4 billion in 2023, primarily due to oil exports. Concordia University's Dr. Moshe Lander joined us to explain the impact of the new tariffs and what this means for the Canadian economy.
We are the biggest supplier of aluminum and steel to the U.S. We export it in finished form, but also in raw form. And this is equivalent to going after the oil and gas sector or the auto sector. It's just one more of the major natural resources that we export to the U.S. And again, Trump's version of we could do it ourselves, you could, but you couldn't do it as well. And you couldn't do it for as low of a cost as we do it. So we're, on the one hand, he's saying he's going to control inflation and bring prices down, which is actually deflation. He can't do it at the same time that he's increasing input costs for American manufacturers. There is a contradiction here. And so even if somehow they had the capacity to replace Canadian aluminum and steel, it's not like you can just onboard it with the snap of a finger. So all of those dormant steel factories, aluminum factories across the US need to be onboarded. They need to be filled with people. Where are you going to find them when you're rounding up immigrants and sticking them on planes and sending them back where they came from? It's not like they have a surplus of labor that's hanging around. Even within the existing factories that are operational, you can't necessarily double or triple up the shifts beyond the fact that labor unions wouldn't allow for it. The factories themselves would disintegrate. They would go into overdrive and they would break down quickly and then need to go offline for extra repairs or maintenance. So there's a disconnect here again. It's merely the idea of he wants Canada's natural resources for free. And so the reason why the 51st state keeps coming up is because he's looking for the idea that somehow if we were part of the US, then they wouldn't have to pay for those resources. Never mind that, of course, they still would. It's just that the money would be going internally instead of externally. And I think that's the thing that drives him crazier than anything is somehow that he has to pay somebody else for what they have. Just take a look around you, and anything that has aluminum or steel in it is going to be essentially coming from Canada, if not Korea or some of the other major players in the market. The construction industry, of course, is top of the line. The auto industry is top of the line. Fine, you can look at the pop bottles and anything like that as well. But really, any manufactured good that has steel in it probably has some Canadian content in it as well. And so if you think about just construction and autos, that's such a huge part of the U.S. economy. It's such a huge part of their manufacturing base that, of course, they're going to use steel and aluminum as major inputs.
Canadian politicians reacted on Sunday to U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement that he's about to introduce 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports coming into the U.S. Industry Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne posted on social media that Ottawa will stand up for Canada, its workers, and its industries. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet said there's no scenario where the U.S. will be able to produce enough aluminum to replace what it gets from Quebec before the end of Mr. Trump's presidency. And this weekend, Mr. Trump's national security advisor was pressed on NBC over whether or not Donald Trump really wants to annex Canada, stating that while he feels there are many Canadians who would want to join the United States, there is no plan to invade Canada.
Is President Trump serious about planning to annex Canada?
Look, I think the Canadian people many of them would love to join the United States with no tariffs, with lower taxes. And I have all kinds of neighbors down in Florida that are Canadians that are escaping many of the liberal policies and have moved in. But look, what we're talking about
yes
here
or
is
no? First of all, I think some
American
Canadians would disagree with
in
you.
the Western Hemisphere.
I think some Canadians would disagree with you. But just yes or no, is he planning to annex
part
Canada?
Of his policy. Well, I don't think there's any plans to invade Canada, if that's what you're talking about. But there is a lot of people that like what we have in the United States and do not like the last 10 years of liberal progressive governance in Trudeau. But really what you're seeing is a reassertion of American leadership in the Western Hemisphere, from the Arctic all the way down to the Panama Canal.
This morning, Pierre Poilievre released his plan for Canada's north, specifically outlining what a Poilievre-led government would do to secure Canada's Arctic.
1, we will double the size of the first patrol group of the Canadian Rangers from 2,000 to 4,000 Rangers. The Canadian Rangers provide self-sufficient mobile forces to support the military. They often report suspicious and unusual activities while providing local knowledge and expertise to the broader Canadian forces. 2, we will acquire 2 additional polar icebreakers for the Royal Canadian Navy. These icebreakers will be on top of the current icebreakers that Seaspan and Davie shipyards are already building for the Coast Guard. The Liberals have promised these 2 heavy icebreakers, but not said when they will deliver them. I will deliver the Coast Guard icebreakers by 2029. And they will be on top of the 2 new Navy icebreakers that I just mentioned. So to sum up, under our common sense conservative plan, Canada will get 2 new heavy icebreakers for the Coast Guard and 2 new heavy icebreakers for the Canadian Navy. 3, the Canada First plan of the Conservative government will build Canada's first permanent Arctic military base since the Cold War. It will be CFB Iqaluit, right here in this community. We will build it in consultation with military experts, local government leaders, and the Indigenous population.
Air Transat has scrapped free carry-ons for those who buy low-fare tickets. The airline says that as of Tuesday, passengers on its Eco Budget or Eco Promo fare class will have to check their luggage on flights within North and South America. The fees range between $35 and $50. Aviation expert John Graddick has more on the change.
Transat is doing it to maximize their revenue potential. I think they're looking at, they were the only major carrier left hanging out there without charge for carry-on bags. WestJet had done it, Sunwing had done it, Air Canada had done it, Porter's been doing it for a while. So the only guy out there that was uncompetitive from their perspective, but a good deal for passengers, was Transat. And Transat decided to join the fray over the weekend and start charging for what was supposedly to be carry-on bag, which is no longer carry-on, which is now $35 to $50 fee for that bag, and it's going to be checked. So, they're joining the fray in terms of what the other carriers are doing to further enhance revenues by doing more ancillary charges. Yeah, Air Transat's going through a couple of issues right now. They're looking at, that last week they got a lifeline thrown to them by the federal government. They owe $300 million under the LEAF program, which was a loan that the government gave them back in 2021, I believe. And another $50 million, which was under a similar program about 3 or 4 months later. And both of those loans had a maturity of early 2026 which meant that they have less than 12 months left to pay them. They don't have the cash to be able to do that at this point in time. So they decided to extend it. They've been asking the government for months to either forgive them that debt or extend it. The government took the lesser of two evils on that one, extended it. And, they're going to leave it to the next government after the election to basically decide what do they do with that overhang that Air Transat has. It's very difficult for Air Transat. They're paying interest on that, and it's big bucks. So the next government's going to have to deal with, do you throw Transat another lifeline after this loan terms expire?
All right, stay tuned. We'll have our weekly Caldwell segment up next. Don't go anywhere. Forum Daily will return shortly. Since U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs on Canada, many Canadians have felt anxious about what's going to happen next. But it's been all hands on deck from coast to coast. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew is urging people to buy local.
Well, 3, 2, 1. Ta-da! Support Manitoba, buy local. So this is a new initiative that our government is launching to really highlight the great local businesses that we have in every corner of this province. You can head to the website, manitoba.ca/buy local. Tons of resources. People have been asking those questions, about whether it's food or booze. I think has been a very popular topic this past week.
And beyond buying local, even hockey fans in Canadian cities are expressing their frustration with the U.S. going as far as to boo the American anthem that is ritually played before NHL games. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said in a press briefing that Canada is more aligned and united than ever, and that the response from Canadians to tariffs has been inspiring.
The one thing that has shone through over the past few days is Canadians being there for their neighbors, for their friends, looking to buy Canadian goods, looking to find Canadian suppliers, looking to be there to support communities right across the country through these challenging times. That is the very best of Canada. We pull together when we're faced with challenges, and that's what we've seen from coast to coast to coast. We are more aligned than ever. We are more united than ever.
I'm now joined by Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited, to discuss how Canada has grown more united in the wake of Trump's tariffs. Brendan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Your previews had me laughing. I don't know that we're more united than ever. We have come to overcome some bigger challenges as a nation than the posturing the current president, and we'll come to it, I'm sure. But you'll notice that coast to coast to coast, and yet buying local means buying Manitoba. I don't know what, and he mentioned alcohol in particular. I don't know what the vineyards of Portage la Prairie are like, but it may be challenging to get some things as locally as the Premier of Manitoba would like.
Well, with the talks of tariffs and tensions between Canada and the United States, it's argued that people have been more inspired to be more patriotic. Many Canadians are wanting to shop and buy more local and travel locally. So do you think you could unpack actually what's happening here? And what do you think that this means for Canada?
So I think there's really two questions there. What is ultimately going to mean and what's the best reaction? Yep. I think there's really two reactions one can have. And I don't know whether one of them is right. One can either actually start a trade war, which I don't think is going to be helpful, because I do think much of what the president is talking about is posturing. No, don't get me wrong. He does wish to see if there's a way he can have tariffs replace income tax, and he would like to show that this is how tough he is on his friends. Just imagine what he'll do to his enemies. But so that's one way. The other way is to be suppliant and keel over and do whatever the president wants, as though he's running our nation yet. But I think the third way that nobody's really thought of trying is just no take the president seriously, but not overreact. It is not likely that there will be 25% across the board tariffs because it doesn't make sense for either country. And ultimately, the president's about getting a deal done. As for being patriotic, yes, but I don't think gestures like booing the national anthem are nearly as good as working on ways that we can actually be united in reality more than in just words.
And what role do interprovincial trade barriers play in all of this, and how might cutting them affect us?
And I think there you go. That's the rub. So on the one hand, you've got the prime minister saying we're united as a nation. On the other hand, the premier of Manitoba and the other premiers talking about just their own provinces. Understandable, as everybody's talking their own position, indeed their own jurisdiction. But there are barriers to moving goods, services, qualified people between countries, and that's problematic because I mean, if you think of the European Union, it's I don't know, approaching 300 million people, and they can move goods and services freely around between countries, and you can move people freely around between countries. Now, it's a little harder to go from Copenhagen to Corfu to practice as a dentist, but I guess may be the same in both languages. But in Canada, it's pretty hard as a professional to move between provinces. There are little provincial, both unions and or professional societies that do put up barriers. And then just even the movement of goods. So we need to be united as a nation. To borrow from one of the fathers of the American Revolution, I think Ben Franklin, if we do not hang together, we shall all surely hang separately.
Now, many Canadians are boycotting travel to the U.S. How do you think that this will affect the travel and tourism industries?
Every industry can adapt to any change. One single shock, fewer Canadians going to the US. The trouble is, where else does one go? Bermuda is a tiny island. The Bahamas scarcely bigger. So we could go to other places, but so many people have cottages or not cottages, winter homes in Florida or Arizona or even California. That's not. It's like the trade relationship in general. The work of decades, generations, even centuries of union are not going to be undone by a few speeches and gestures. Really, what we need to do as a country is actually take serious measures and think seriously about how our relation is with the United States and our relation to the rest of the world. If our biggest export is energy, and our nearest neighbor doesn't want our energy or says they don't want our energy, then all right, we need to look for other markets. Yes, we are a decade behind, and so we need to get on it post haste. But we will adapt, and so will the travel market in the U.S. adapt. So Canada, maybe we're not as united as we've been ever, to dial down the prime minister's hyperbole, but maybe we're the most united we've been, say, since the last 10 years.
Well, and to stay on the topic of traveling, how can we make domestic travel in Canada more accessible?
Well, we could be warmer in the winter than we are now. So yeah, the fact is, Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth, and the climate emergency, which I'm resisting not doing the air quotes on, notwithstanding, Canada is still going to be a very cold place for a while. So it is a tough one to imagine. Like when we want to travel in the winter, we need to go south. Now, in the summertime, actually the biggest month for the travel industry in Canada is the third calendar quarter, the one from July, August, September, is the biggest quarter. So possibly having greater domestic competition in plane travel. I mean, the U.S. is all about moving around the U.S. Some large majority of Americans don't even have passports; they don't need to. You want to ski, you go to Vermont. You want to get sun, you go to Florida. You don't have to leave the U.S. So making it easier to travel around. Canada would be one way of doing it. So opening up our airline space to greater competition rather than the duopoly or oligopolies that seem to rule of every industry in this country could be a way.
Now, I want to talk about the hockey and the fans booing. So Bill Blair came out after that and said that it's not that Canada's angry, it's that Canada's disappointed. Kind of like what your parents said. I'm not mad, just disappointed. um, so do you think that the United States and Canada's relationship will ever go back to normal if these tariffs do happen?
Well, for the, it could be a long time. It could be a very long time. Trade relationships take, as I said earlier, years, decades, even centuries to build up. The last time we were at the peak global trade prior to our lifetimes was actually 1914, and then it all came apart pretty quickly. So global trade relations takes a long time to build up, but they can be undone pretty quickly, and then it takes generations to build them back up again. So in answer to your question, maybe not.
Now, we do just have under a minute, but do you think these movements will affect the markets?
Weirdly, they haven't. I think there's a few other factors going on in the markets, but you have a combination of higher interest rates, the uh, the um, the advent of international competition in the AI market, which America thought it had dominated, and then these Trump tariffs, for want of a better term, along with the ongoing global conflicts. You got a lot of stuff going on, and the market's holding in there very well. There is an old expression: bull markets ignore bad news. And that may be where we are, or maybe it'll take one more shock to actually pull the market down.
The campaign teams for the remaining Liberal leadership contests all confirmed Friday that they cleared a major fundraising hurdle, allowing them to remain in the race. The campaign said they have each paid the party $125,000 that was due today, part of an installment plan to manage a hefty total entry fee of $350,000. The candidates will have to come up with a final payment of $125,000 by February 17th. Former Liberal House Leader Karina Gold campaign confirmed on Friday afternoon that she cleared the bar and said that the average individual donation to her campaign was $150, but called the deadline aggressive and designed to limit the candidates on the ballot.
So look, the party has put forward an extremely aggressive fundraising deadline. They have tried to make it as hard as possible for only a few candidates to participate in this race. But what I can tell you is my campaign is powered by people. 85% of my donations are $200 or less, and I have received support from thousands of people across this country. We're doing everything to meet those fundraising deadlines, and I have to say that I am buoyed by the incredible support that I am getting from everyday Canadians. My campaign doesn't have the deep pockets of some of the other candidates, but what it does have is people power. And I have to say that we have had great fundraising results, and we're going to keep going. So despite the efforts of the party establishment to keep people out of this race, I'm in it and I'm excited about it.
The Liberal Party of Canada will hold 2 leadership debates this month. A French debate is set for February 24th, and an English debate is scheduled for the following day, both in Montreal. Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, former central banker Mark Carney, Liberal MP Karina Gold, and former Liberal MPs Frank Baylis and Ruby Dalla are all in the leadership race. The party will elect its next leader on March 9th. Liberal strategist Andrew Perez joins us now for more on the leadership race. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
Now, I want to start with defense spending because several candidates have made pledges to have Canada meet our NATO spending commitment of 2% of GDP. Now, can you give us the rundown on who is pledging what?
Yeah, so most of the candidates in this race, certainly the top 3, are pledging to ensure that Canada meets it 2% of GDP spending when it comes to our commitment to NATO. This has been an aspirational target that Canada has long had, but we have come up short for the past several years. And so really, the devil is in the details. Miss Freeland and Miss Gould are promising to meet that 2% GDP threshold by 2027, which, by the way, is 5 years ahead of the current plan that the Trudeau government has. And Mr. Carney has also pledged to meet that threshold by the year 2030. And so I think there's a broad recognition from the candidates, with the exception of Ruby Dalla, that Canada should be meeting its NATO commitments. And we know that this was one of the Trump administration's key criticisms of Canada, and one of the reasons they cited for levying tariffs is that Canada isn't meeting its NATO commitments. Now, I just note finally, Teresa, that this year our commitment to NATO was, in terms of a dollar amount, $33 billion. For us to meet that 2% threshold of GDP, we would have to more than double the dollar amount to about $81 billion. So this would represent a major, major line item in the federal budget, but the major candidates in the Liberal leadership all seem to be committed to doing that.
Now, the candidates have expressed their hope to reach this accomplishment, but I'm curious, have they shared how they plan on getting there?
No, there's been no real detail, Teresa, around how the government would meet that major 2% threshold. Just that Ms. Gould and Ms. Freeland plan to do so by the year 2027 and Mr. Carney 2030. I'd add that, the fiscal math is going to be tough because all the candidates have committed to maintaining the federal government's commitment to the dental care program, the national child care program, and also the pharmacare program. So it will be incumbent upon the candidates over the coming weeks to really flesh out where they're going to get the money to meet this major spending commitment.
And on the economy and tax policy, can you explain to us where the candidates stand right now?
Yeah, so Mr. Carney has promised a major middle class tax cut. Again, he hasn't really provided the detail on how he would do that. Ms. Gould has promised to slash the GST from 5% to 4% and make up the money for that by increasing corporate tax cuts on corporations making north of $500 million a year. And all the candidates have pledged to reverse the increase in the capital gains inclusion rate that Ms. Freeland introduced as finance minister about 8 months ago. So there seems to be a broad recognition among the top tier candidates that the capital gains changes that were made last year weren't the right move, and that we really should be moving towards more middle class tax relief. But again, no real financial accounting, no real details provided as to how any of these candidates, if they were to become prime minister, would be able to accomplish this from a fiscal point of view. So I'm not sure we'll see a lot more detail released in the next month, but we'll have to wait and see if we do.
Now, I want to move over to immigration. So Ruby Dalla has said that she would deport all illegal immigrants. Are other candidates weighing in on the immigration debate?
No, Teresa, none of the other candidates have really spoken about immigration as a policy. Ms. Freeland has promised to streamline the foreign credential recognition program. What I'd say, though, is in the last year, we've seen the Trudeau government make major changes to immigration. The government announced last year a 20% reduction in permanent residents coming into this country. In 2024, we hit a high mark. We had 500,000 permanent residents entering in Canada. But the new policy that the Trudeau government announced last year will see that number reduced by 20%. So this year, we'll bring in just below 400,000 new people to this country, and that will gradually be reduced by 2027 to just 365,000 new residents, which is still quite a bit above the 250,000 people we brought into this country for much of the first couple decades of the 21st century. So I suspect there's a consensus among the top tier candidates that the changes to immigration that Trudeau has brought in recently have probably hit the mark. And so we haven't really seen any fleshed out details on changing those numbers.
And Ruby Dalla's claim to deport all illegal immigrants is quite harsh from a liberal perspective. Do you think that this is going to hurt or help her campaign?
Yeah, I'm not sure where Miss Dalla is going exactly with that. I mean, it's certainly a headline that will attract clickbait. It sounds like a commitment more designed for a conservative base, for a conservative party. I'd be curious to hear in the leadership debates, perhaps Miss Dalla will provide more detail as to how she would accomplish that.
So Frank Bayless last week came out with a plan to fundamentally change how the government works, including term limits. Could you explain to us his proposal and what you make of that?
Yeah, it was a pretty bold proposal, Teresa, with three main planks. The first plank really, ensuring that we have a 10-year term limit for both members of parliament and senators. This idea that we don't want our parliament to be full of professional politicians. We want new blood. We want people with real life experience. I've never seen that proposal seriously put forth in a Canadian context, but it is one that I broadly support. The second commitment was to really ensure that it's the Speaker of the House of Commons and not the party leader's office that determines who asks questions. So going back decades, it's the House leader's office of each party that would really determine which MPs ask questions in question period. And so this would be really returning the power to Parliament and to the Speaker of the House of Commons, as well as allowing any petition that receives more than 75,000 signatures to be debated in the House of Commons. And then the final plank is bringing in basically a second house, a second legislature to debate issues. And this has been done in the UK and Australia. And I think the thinking there is that it would really expedite debate and allow Parliament to be more efficient in terms of passing legislation. So again, Mr. Bayless is not a top contender in this race. He does not have a path to victory. And I think he's putting out this democratic reform platform as a way to really garner attention and stir up some debate in the party.
Now, I want to ask you about the prime minister. So the tariff debate has picked back up now that Donald Trump is saying that he's coming after the steel and aluminum. Is it a smart move for the prime minister to be in France at an AI summit rather than in Ottawa or potentially in Washington?
Well, look, I think, the prime minister of Canada, the leader of a G7 country, has a demanding travel schedule. And of course, in this case, Mr. Trudeau will only be prime minister for one more month. So I don't fault the prime minister for attending conferences and major international events like this one in his final weeks as prime minister. At the end of the day, the Canadian government, the federal government, has stood strong, has announced retaliatory tariffs. We've seen Minister Champagne in the news already reacting to the announcement of steel and aluminum tariffs that Trump spoke to on Sunday. And so I think the federal government is playing a leadership role along with the premiers, fighting back, putting Canada first. And the prime minister will travel as he has to, but I don't think that takes away the focus that this government's had in the last few weeks in really talking tough and fighting to protect Canadian jobs and sovereignty.
Thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks, Teresa. Take care.
All right, stay with us. More news right after this. Three Israeli civilian men appeared in much poorer physical condition than the previous 18 hostages released during the latest ceasefire, which sparked outrage in Israel. Well, on Air Force One, U.S. President Donald Trump commented on the state of the hostages, comparing them to the images seen after the Holocaust.
When I see that scene that I saw today with people coming out of helicopters and airplanes that are emaciated, that look like they haven't had a meal in a month, there's no reason for that. And I don't know how much longer we can take it.
Do you think you want to recast?
I don't know how long we can take it. When I watch people that were healthy people a reasonably short number of years ago, and you look at them today, they look like they've aged 25 years. They literally look like the old pictures of Holocaust survivors. The same thing. I mean, the same thing. And I don't know how long we're going to take that.
Israel released 183 prisoners as part of the ceasefire agreement. Citizen spokesperson Adela Kohab joined us from Israel for more on the release.
The three hostages were released after 491 days in captivity 16 months in captivity. And as they walked on stage being paraded by Hamas terrorists holding machine guns and chanting and yelling while being handed certificates of being held in captivity, you could see that they were visibly frail, a level of frailness that we haven't seen with other hostages. If we saw the women that were released earlier this week or that were released earlier this month, or even in the first hostage exchange, the women seem to be in much better condition. The men, of course, we know are the slower hostages that Hamas will release, and each one looked more emaciated than the next, which means that the other male hostages that are being held are likely held in similar conditions. We've also heard from them after, speaking to their trauma specialists and to initial intakes with the Israeli forces, that they were tortured severely while in captivity. They were being hung by their feet. They were only being allowed to shower once every couple of months after being held for 16 months. And they're conditions that we honestly cannot even imagine, conditions that were inhuman, which, by the way, if you compare that to the way that they were released, it's such an undignified way to return home. I think the Red Cross needs to step in and say that this is not the way that we can treat released civilian hostages. Both Eli Sharabi and Ohad Ben Ami were taken from the Be'eri kibbutz, which is a kibbutz that's right near Gaza. They were taken in the morning, early morning, and they were brought into Gaza where they were held for 16 months. Eli Sharabi came out of captivity, and the first thing he said was that he wanted to be reunited with his wife and his daughters. But unbeknownst to him, they have been killed on October 7th. The trauma that Eli Sharabi will face when he's actually told that his family has been taken away from him will be almost as severe as his captivity. It's also important to know that Be'eri, which was one of the most hard-hit kibbutzim, has been waiting for their members to be returned home, and now 2 of them will actually be able to return. Or Levy, who is 34, was taken from the Nova Music Festival and was held in captivity for 16 months. To think about the point of view of Or going to a music festival where he was partying for 2-3 days, and then suddenly he spent the next 16 months in captivity is also such a stark difference that's going to be impossible to comprehend. I think that the 3 victims that were now released, the 3 hostages that were released, are going to have to reintegrate into society. It's going to be a slow process. The world that they left is very different from the one that they're coming back to.
We also spoke about the reaction from the Israeli public after seeing the hostages released in such poor condition.
The Palestinian prisoners that are being released in exchange for these 3 civilian hostages are in jail for some of the most heinous crimes against humanity, from planning terror attacks and bombings to first-degree murder. These terrorists are being held not because they were in the wrong place in the wrong time. One of the terrorists who was supposed to be released from prison, Jamal Al-Hur, was in jail for killing Sharon Adiri. And after a social media campaign and outrage from the Israeli public, they ended up not releasing him as part of this deal. The feeling in Israel is twofold. On one hand, we want every single hostage home so they don't bear a single other day in captivity the way that these 3 did. But on the other hand, the anger and the feeling that the ceasefire is an unfair deal is also brewing. I think that on behalf of the Israeli public, I can say that every single hostage must return home as they should have 16 months ago. It has been way too long for these families to wait for their children to come home and to see fathers, uncles, children, mothers, grandmothers in the states that they've been coming out has really been heartbreaking for the Israeli public and the Jewish public in general.
Families of hostages still being held in Gaza gathered in Tel Aviv again on Sunday to urge Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to extend the ceasefire that has paused the war. Mr. Netanyahu is also under pressure from right-wing political allies to resume the war so that Hamas can be defeated. Egypt is set to host an emergency Arab summit on February 27th to discuss new developments after U.S. President Donald Trump proposed to relocate the population of Gaza and take ownership of the territory. The humanitarian chief for the United Nations says that the famine has mostly been avoided in the Gaza Strip as a surge of aid enters the territory amid a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. However, Tom Fletcher warns that the famine threat could quickly return if the truce collapses. Gaza has seen hundreds of trucks arrive with humanitarian aid each day since the ceasefire started on January 19th. In an interview with Fox News, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated there is no starvation in Gaza.
This kangaroo court called the ICC, they declared me a war criminal, right? And what am I charged with? That we deliberately starved the population of Gaza, right? Which is completely false. I mean, we gave instructions early on, not only to get them out of harm's way, but also to supply humanitarian supplies like food, water, whatever. But here's the thing. We took thousands of Palestinian Hamas prisoners, okay? You know what the first thing you do when you take a prisoner, a Palestinian Hamas prisoner? You want to make sure that he doesn't have an explosive belt on his, suicide belt, okay? So you ask them to take their shirts off. So now we have photos of thousands of these prisoners who have, without their shirt. And you will not find not one, emaciated. In fact, you'll find quite a few who are overweight because they eat, because there's no starvation, and also they don't exercise. You don't get much exercise in the tunnels, like these terror tunnels that they built. So this is completely false.
The leaders of Ontario's main political parties took a break from public announcements yesterday, reaching a much bigger audience on the couch. The Liberals and Progressive Conservatives each aired competing campaign ads during Super Bowl Sunday. The Ontario Liberal Party ran two 30-second ads, with one attacking Premier Doug Ford and another focused on healthcare.
Leadership is about priorities. And for 7 years, Doug Ford has had the wrong ones. The result? A healthcare system in crisis. People are afraid to get sick. As Premier, I'll have one priority: fixing our healthcare. We'll take the money that Ford wastes on bad deals and invest it where it matters, starting with getting you a family doctor. I'm Bonnie Crombie, the new leader of Ontario's Liberals, and I'll get more for you.
The PCs also ran two ads, making the case that Mr. Ford is the best choice to shield Ontario from Mr. Trump's proposed tariffs.
We all have things we worry about. But when we know trouble is headed our way, we need a fighter. Someone who protects us, our jobs, and our families. That's Premier Doug Ford. When Ottawa descended into chaos, he stood up for us.
Now taking Trump on tonight, Ontario Premier Doug Ford.
The next 4 years won't be easy. There's big decisions ahead, and there's only one leader to protect Ontario. That's Premier Doug Ford.
The Philadelphia Eagles won their second Super Bowl in franchise history with a 40-22 victory over the Kansas City Chiefs. After the game, Philly's head coach said, quote, "We showed the entire world what good teamwork does."
And we had to come out and play our best, and we did. And what a lesson to the entire world of what good teamwork does. We have selfless guys. We have guys that don't want to let each other down. We got guys that will fight for each other, that will play hurt for each other. They love each other. Love is a strong thing, and it takes a lot of work to develop that. And these guys, that's a team. That's a team, and the greatest team sport there is.
Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts won the MVP award. He also became only the second player to win a Super Bowl over Patrick Mahomes, something only Tom Brady has done.
God is good. He's greater than all the highs and the lows, and I think personally myself, I've just been able to use every experience and learn from it. The good, the bad, all of it, using it as fuel to pursue my own greatness. And I think I couldn't do any of these things without the guys around me. We had a special group this year. We were able to learn from the past and get some nice new pieces and get over that hump.
And in true Philadelphia fashion, fans were seen celebrating the best way they know how. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.